With Hugh Freeze flipping the roster, the Auburn Tigers are still inside the blue chip ratio. What does that mean? We discuss on today's Locked On Auburn.
Freezing temperatures are likely for several hours inland and a few hours closer to the coast.
Yahtzee.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Joining us, as he does most Fridays, for a little Ferg Friday action, Justin Ferguson of the Auburn Observer. And Ferg, you put out a great newsletter, I guess it was either earlier this week or late last week, about Auburn still being in the blue chip ratio. So for folks who are unaware of what the blue chip ratio is, kind of give us, explain like I'm five type thing.
Absolutely. Blue chip ratio was invented by Bud Elliot when he was at SB Nation, now at 247. It's basically a measurement of how much talent a team needs on their roster in order to win a national championship. And it's a very simple formula. It's not a perfect formula by any means, and I'll explain kind of why in a little bit, but it's basically in the last four recruiting classes that you brought in are more or half of or more, 50% or more of your guys that you're bringing in 5 stars or 4 stars, aka blue chips, in the 247 composite, more than you get 3 stars and 2 stars. So basically, if your roster, what you're bringing in through the high school ranks, is more blue chips than not, you have enough talent to win a national championship. And that's because every national champion in the championship game era has met that criteria. There have been teams that have come close. TCU last year, obviously making it to the title game. Oregon a few years back against Ohio State. Oregon against Auburn. In fact, Auburn's probably the closest team to not being in the blue chip ratio in 2010 to win it all. But it's the measurement that you have to have. And so it's basically a group of the elite recruiters in college football. Every year there's anywhere between 12, 15, 16 teams that are in that mix. And it doesn't say that you're going to have a great season. It doesn't guarantee anything. It just says, hey, if things go your way, you know that you have enough talent and depth. That's the big thing. It's quality depth needed to win it all. It changes a little bit in the transfer portal era, but it is kind of the measurement to say, hey, do you have enough to make it happen and have a chance of winning a national title? So don't pick anybody to win a national title that's outside of this, because so far, and it's been over 20 years now, it hasn't worked out.
Yeah. So for the camp that says stars don't matter, I mean, it's not everything, but they definitely do. They definitely do matter. 4 stars are good. 5 stars have the chance to be really, really good, and 3 stars you got to develop. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of it if you're going to try to win a national championship. How does this change with the transfer portal? Because do they now rate, like if you're a 4-star transfer, but you were a 3-star coming out of high school, how does that play into it?
Yeah, there's still research in that, because I think one of the things that Bud did, and when he came up with this back in, I think it was 2011 or 2012 was when he first had it, he had years and years of NFL draft data and like to kind of say, okay, this is what they value. Transfers are a different story at this point, but what you can see is how much attrition affects a roster. So basically the transfer portal rarely helps a team in the blue chip ratio and mostly only hurts them. You don't usually see a team go up when you take transfers out of the or into the equation, because most of the time you're getting these 4 and 5 star guys, they don't play, and now it's easier for them to go jump somewhere else, right? And Auburn obviously is a key factor in that. They have recruited at a top 15 level on average over the last 4 cycles, but I mean, there's a bulk of several of these last few classes for Auburn that are just not there anymore. And so if you take transfers out of the equation, into the equation, take transfers out, put what you have in, you're under the blue chip ratio if you're Auburn. And so what that means for 2023 is basically this team got transfers that can help them win right now. They had to flip this roster and get guys that can play right away. But this is not a team that's got that championship quality talent that you would imagine a national title contender would have. Doesn't mean they can't have a good season by any means. And we've seen teams have great seasons without hitting this point. But it is just, when you compare it to like what 2017 Auburn was, 2013 Auburn was, 2010 Auburn even, those are teams that, were firmly in that range. And so for what that means for Auburn is this: look, you did what you needed to do this year. And honestly, what Hugh Freeze and this staff did in December just to bring the blue chips. I mean, if they wouldn't have made that haul that they got with the Keldrick Falks and the K and Lees and those guys, they would be out of they would be out of the ratio right now.
Right.
But what this means moving forward is this: you have to continue to flip your roster and get that. Know that you can't build a championship contender on transfers alone.
Mm-hmm.
What you've got to do is it's got to be through high school recruiting. And the point of my newsletter was, and Free said this back when we were at the Senior Bowl back in February, he's like, hey, we know that the 24 and 25 classes are what's going to define the success of this tenure. And if you look at Auburn's 2024 class, still small right now, but you look at it, most of those guys are consensus blue chip players. You've got to keep bringing in those guys like that. That's what it takes. You'll take 3 stars that fit your scheme, fit your program, fit your culture. You'll take them, run with them. You can even develop those guys to be NFL players. Auburn did that a lot during the Malzahn era. But what you want to do is you want to build that quality depth with guys that are, high quality guys coming out of high school. Because you were saying, Zach, like, stars don't matter. That's a thing that people say. Yeah. Here's what I like to say about stars. Stars matter on a macro level more than a micro level. And when 5 stars will bust. There's always 5 stars that are going to bust. You've probably sitting here thinking of 4 or 5 right now that come to mind.
Sure.
You can think of 3 stars and 2 stars who jump up and make it. But on a macro level, the teams that win the most are the ones who bring in the most 4 and 5 stars, and so on and so forth. If you go look at the newsletter, I mean, blue chip ratios, if you're in the 70% or above, that's guaranteeing you about 11 or 12 wins a year. I mean, that's what gets you there.
And look, Auburn's had a bad run of 5 stars, right? I mean, like, sure, Calvin Ashley, Byron Cowart. I mean, it stinks. Like Owen Papo was good, but he wasn't as good as we kind of thought he would be. And I don't think that's entirely his fault. And that's a discussion for another day. But like, we've had a bit of a bad run with these guys. Even like, I think Rock Thomas was a 5-star, wasn't he? And like,
and Bo was too. And obviously the Bo that played last year at Oregon looked like a 5-star.
Yeah.
But it was a completely different story, at Auburn, just because, again, of different factors. I think the same thing with Owen. Owen with injuries, I think, a fully healthy Owen for 3-4 years. I mean, who knows what that could look like?
Yeah. Also not fully convinced that we used him correctly, but once again, the discussion for a different day.
Sure.
Ironically, the only player that's in Auburn's 2024 class that I don't think will end up being a blue chip player, because Bryce Cain's a 3-star right now. I think everybody believes he will be a 4-star when it's all said and done. Is Martavius Collins, who was committed to Alabama. And so, I think there's a little bit of irony there.
Well, I mean, Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State, they take 3s every year. And that's the thing, is like, if they look at a 3, they see something really special in those guys that they feel a need. They fit what they want. There's a style, clicking there or something like that. So you always want to take them. Right. I mean, you look at this last class for Auburn, you'd love to have K and Lee. You love to have those guys, the Sylvester Smiths. Like, it had a really good run of those guys they flipped. You'll love having a JC Hart as well, because those kind of guys, local guys, hardworking dudes, are going to be able, physically there. Just, may have fallen under the radar a little bit, just because, in the case of a guy like JC, played 1A football. And didn't play on the, a bigger stage to get noticed or, get compared to some of the better recruits.
Yep. And don't forget baby goat Hank Brown. We'll see. We'll see how he develops. But all right. So the offensive line, is it set, or will there still be position battles over summer and fall? That coming up on today's Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Bird Dogs. I was working out earlier this morning in normal gym shorts. I'm walking across the gym, and an everydayer comes up to me. His name was Chris, and he's like, "Where are your bird dogs, Zach? Where are your bird dogs?" I felt exposed. He called me out, but he knows that bird dogs, you can wear them everywhere, because he's heard me talk and say such good things about them. I should have worn my bird dogs to the gym, but sadly, Chris, they were dirty. So bird dogs do just about everything, but they do get dirty. You still have to wash them like normal shorts. But seriously, they look like very fancy khaki shorts, but they've got this stretch fiber. They're very thin. They dry off quickly if they get wet. You can do anything in them. You can work out of them. They've got these liners. They're incredible. So head over and get yourself a pair of them today. birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. And when you do that and go to that URL, they will apply a free Yeti-style tumbler to your order. Once again, that is birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you. Justin Ferguson of the Auburn Observer, our guest. So when we left spring, it felt like we were pretty solid on the offensive line in 3 of the 5 spots. And, the 3 transfers that came in: left tackle Dylan Wade, center Avery Jones, right tackle was Gunnar Britton. Thank you. And so it seemed like there was in a rotation with the guard spots where we saw some Jeremiah Wright. We saw a lot of Tate Johnson. We saw some Connor Lew when Tate Johnson was hurt. And the roster didn't really change a whole lot on the offensive line post-spring, with the exception if you go out and get Jaden Muskrat, a guy who played traditionally more tackle than guard at Tulsa. So my question to you is, what do the position battles look like right now? Are there position battles, or is Muskrat just a backup tackle?
I think both guard spots are going to be up for grabs. I feel like the 2 tackle spots and the center spots, like you said, coming out of spring, I mean, barring injury, those are your 3 guys there.
Sure. Right.
I think a thing with Jeremiah Wright is if he'd have been fully healthy in the spring, maybe he'd have gone a little further into kind of locking down one of those spots. If I had to pick today, I would think that Jeremiah Wright starts at one of the guard spots for Auburn this season. Okay. I think Jaden Muskrat, though, is a shot. It has a real shot to start at guard for Auburn this year. Talking to Philip Montgomery, I guess that was a couple months ago or last month. He said, yeah, he's a guy that we feel like can give us something on the inside, and he's got some of that edge. He is more guard size than tackle size, especially when you look at the SEC.
Right.
He kind of plays more like his style is it fits guard as much as it does at tackle. So yeah, I think he could be a swing guy for you if he's not a starter, and kind of be that, that guy that can help you out at guard and tackle. But if you look at the tackle spots, like Too Tall Miller, is going to be probably somebody that is going to be the next man up at tackle, depending on what side it is. You could probably use Muskrat there if you don't have it. But if Muskrat comes out and it's like, hey, this dude's played a good amount of FBS football, he started in this system before, we feel like he's one of the 5 best guys, they'll find a way to put him there. And then I think that would kind of give you some more flexibility for the future. See what you got in Tate Johnson is trying to develop him as maybe a guard for the next wave. And then, I think Connor Lew could end up being a guy that you see some this year. Right. I think the comp I keep going back to, not stylistically or just kind of the makeup of him, but just kind of the way people are talking about him coming in as a true freshman. Reminds me a lot when Braden Smith came to Auburn. When he was a freshman, there really wasn't a starting spot for him. It was hard to start a true freshman, but they were like, man, we still got to find a way to get this dude some reps, because we think he's good enough to play right now, and we think that's going to be valuable. Obviously, it turned out to be great for Braden's future. Is that more than the 4-game redshirt limit? I don't know, but I do know that Connor Lew is going to probably end up being your second best bet if somebody goes down on the interior. And whether that
at all 3 spots, which is unique.
Yeah. And if you can play, you can play. And that's the thing with him, is that, I think Auburn would be much more comfortable not trusting a true freshman to be a starter on the offensive line. It can happen. LSU started 2 true freshmen last year and won the SEC West with them.
Sure.
But you don't want to have to do that if you, if you could avoid it. And I think going and getting these transfers kind of help them bridge that gap. So yeah, that roundabout way of saying, I think both those guard spots are going to be up for grabs in the fall, and I wouldn't rule any of those competitors out for it. It'll just be a matter of who fits that best 5. Who's the best 5 together with I guess with those 3 that we mentioned earlier.
Are we calling Xavier Miller Too Tall Miller? Is that what he goes by?
That's his nickname. And that's
that's awesome.
Freeze has called him that pretty much every time he's referred to him. I don't think I've
missed that. That's
I
awesome.
don't think I've heard him say Xavier. Or he might have early on, but it's always Too Tall with him.
Too Tall. I love that.
And so yeah, I mean that's something you need to keep an eye on for sure with him. And I think JUCO guy, multiple years of eligibility remaining. It'd be very, very helpful if Auburn can find a way to get him on the field some this year, and then next year when those tackles are gone, turn him loose.
Yeah, I mean, they brought in so many transfers. All of a sudden now you kind of look a year out, and Dylan Wade could come back, which maybe he will, maybe he won't. I think he's hoping he has a good enough season to go pro. We'll see. But
I think he's got a good chance.
Yeah, I do too. Connor Lew is your starting center next year. Tate Johnson's got a solid chance to play guard next year. And then Too Tall and Jaden Muskrat. I mean, you've got dudes all of a sudden where it's like, okay, finally, we're not going to have to duct tape the offensive line every year. Like this, you're starting to kind of see a little bit of a plan come together.
I believe Jeremiah Wright would still have eligibility left.
I think so. Yeah, I think he does.
It would be, you'd be in a good spot. And then you have to start kind of replenish, is what we were going back to earlier with the blue chip ratio. You got to start replenishing it with those freshmen. And they got some of those guys coming in. And you got to keep developing up and building them up moving forward. And I think that's the thing is, every coach has their own opinion on what they want to do in recruiting each year, what they want to have, how many they want to carry. But
Right.
I've always thought, and I think now it's a little bit easier to do when you're in the transfer portal era. If you can bring in, if you have a pretty balanced roster and you can bring in the equivalent of an offensive line pretty much every cycle and just keep rolling it, you'll be in a good shape moving forward. So I think do that, build it out with more guys that are 4 and 5 star kind of talent out of high school. I think is the best case scenario to rebuild this offensive line because it's going to be a multi-year process. We knew that.
Right.
It was a multi-year fall. It was a hole. It took you years to dig this hole. It's going to take you even more years to get out of it. But you knew that coming in.
You're allowed to get 5 offensive linemen every year. Did we know that before?
Well, at one point
it was 9 in one offseason.
Yeah, it was. At one point, it was like, could you get more than 2? It was the real question.
That's just wild that went on for so long. And it wasn't that long ago. I talked to somebody that was on that staff, and I'm like, why couldn't y'all get offensive linemen? And they were like, we put too much of an emphasis on like 1 through 4, and we probably should have put emphasis on like 1 through 10. And I'm like, yeah. Like, what do you mean?
That's the one position you can't afford not to have depth in, because that is a position you think about the offensive line and defensive line. You think about the violence on every single snap that they have to go through and just the toll that it puts on them.
Right.
Like, guys are going to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
They just are. And so that's the one position you don't want to be caught lacking at. However, and again, and it's something that I always point out when I talk about offensive line, is it's such a unique position group in a number of ways. One, it's the hardest to develop. It's the hardest to evaluate. Number 2, it's one where everybody's got to work together. If one guy screws up, everything looks bad. And number 3, it's the only position group on offense where you have to be doing your job on every single play or else it doesn't work.
That's right.
If you're every other spot on the field. If I'm a wide receiver, it's like, well, I probably should be busting my tail on run blocking, but if I'm not, it's not going to break the play. Not the case of offensive line. Offensive line,
you got to be perfect.
Even the quarterback, even all the stuff he's got to do pre-snap. Sometimes you're just handing the ball off and letting the running back do his thing. Like,
right.
Offensive line's got to be on their game every time, and so it's to be that lacking there for as long as Auburn did. It's why they're in the position that they're in.
Yep. All right. Justin Ferguson, I believe Auburn's defensive backs, specifically the corners, are being ridiculously overlooked. We discussed in just a moment right here on Locked On Auburn. I want to encourage you to join the Locked On Auburn Discord. It is free. All you have to do is click the link in the episode description down below. All right, Ferg, it's magazine season, right? And as all these preseason magazines continue to come out, most of them have like unit rankings, right? Like top cornerbacks or top offensive linemen or whatever. And like, I don't know how many Auburn deserves to be like top 20 in. Like, I really don't know how many units like you feel good about on this team, other than running back and defensive back, specifically corners. And I'm just not seeing any Auburn corners ranked highly. And I just think it's crap. I don't think it makes any sense at all. I mean, you're looking at DJ James and Nehemiah Pritchett, 2 guys that the Senior Bowl was bummed that they were returning to school. Like, they wanted both of those guys, and NFL teams were ready to draft both of those guys. And they both came back for another year. If that happened anywhere else, there'd be so much buzz around them as a tandem, but we're just not getting that here. And I don't really get why.
Yeah, I wrote about this earlier this week at the Observer. If you look at DJ James, you can make the argument that he is the best returning corner in the SEC this year. And if you look at Nehemiah Pritchett, there's a good argument that he's a top 6, 7, 8 guy in the league. Combo-wise, you don't get that. If you look at opponent completion percentage, the only team in college football that returns 2 guys that had numbers as good as Nehemiah Pritchett and DJ James last year is Toledo. And no disrespect to Toledo, but they play in the MAC. Right. You could make an argument statistically. You can make an argument that the best returning cornerback duo in college football is at Auburn. And I know statistically, like, anybody could watch DJ James last season and say he's got it. There's some Auburn fans that I've seen that are a little lower on Nehemiah Pritchett. And I think some of that is kind of carryover from when he was playing more of that slot corner, that nickel spot, and it wasn't quite as good of a fit. Statistically, on the outside, he has been stronger these last couple of seasons. Last year, he was a good corner. Not an elite corner, but he was a very good corner. And I think when you look at his numbers, they deserve a lot of respect. Look, Auburn had a top 30 pass defense last year. Like, I think people overlook how good that pass defense was last season. And so when you bring your top two corners back from that, yeah, you're absolutely being overlooked. Were DJ James and Nehemiah Pritchett, 5 stars coming out of high school? No. But statistically, they delivered. And I think part of it really, Zach, is just the fact that Auburn struggled last year. And so you're looking at Auburn and it's like, yeah, they're bringing it back, but man, they went 5-7 last year. Yes, but they didn't go 5-7 because their pass defense was getting torched every week. There were a couple of games that were rough, but for the most part, they held their own and did as well as you probably would expect a team that struggled as much as Auburn did last year in a modern SEC to play on the back end.
Now, I don't know if they're going to perform that from like a statistical output because I'm concerned about the pass rush this season for the Tigers.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so, the pass defense may get worse from a year ago, but I do think they'll have to play less snaps than a year ago because I just trust the offense is going to be able to sustain more drives and, have less 3-and-outs. We think
and maybe the coaching staff will actually rotate guys more because that's something that the previous staff just did not do on the defensive side at all 3 levels.
Yeah. I mean, there were games where they played 19 defenders and it's like, what are you doing? Like, what in the world?
You get to a game, you've only played 3 inside linebackers and you're like, how? Like how you're playing. It's 2023 that this is impossible.
Right. Yeah. And so, the guys behind him, Kane Lee, he's certainly going to have a role. JD Rim's certainly going to have a role. We'll see if some other true freshmen that maybe weren't here in spring could possibly step up and get a bigger role. But I mean, I just love this cornerback room. And I hate that they're not getting the love that they deserve. And I've talked to both of them and, just kind of chit chatting with them throughout the offseason. And like I think they kind of like it because both of these guys like aren't vocal dudes. Like DJ and Nehemiah, like they do not talk a lot. In fact,
for DBs, usually DBs are great.
Yeah, usually they're
not.
Chippy. Yeah. And Nehemiah said he's trying to be more vocal as like a leader because he's like, the guy back there, which makes sense. But I mean, it's funny because the guy before them was Roger, and Roger didn't talk that much either, except for the Iron Bowl, which was awesome. I love that. And it seemed like it fired people up. But for whatever reason, they're not getting the love. And I think it's disrespectful. And so I want to make sure it's very clear that they are getting love from this platform. That is all.
It's statistically, I mean, they're there. And I know not everybody will dig into like PFF numbers and stuff like that, like others will, but like that is exactly, I mean, the numbers are there. Their coverage numbers are great. Downfield coverage, they were 2 of the best guys in the SEC last season. Like you just need to, and then I think on top of that too, Keontae Scott at nickel, you got your safeties. I thought I wrote about it not too long ago. Jalen Simpson, his play went up. Like he played some of the best ball of his career when they moved him back to safety. It was just such a good fit for him. Yeah. Zion Puckett back there. You've got Donovan Kaufman. Like there's just a number of guys out there. That secondary, there's so much turnover and so much transition all across this roster. And Auburn had some of that last year with their secondary. This year, though, they've got to kind of keep it calm. You have Zach Etheridge back. You have a guy who's at least familiar with the program and Crime Dog in as well. That secondary should be a foundation of what you got. Big questions about how Auburn's going to rush the passer. Big questions if they're going to be able to rebuild that run defense that was so rough last year. But the secondary, I mean, this is as good of a spot as you could expect a secondary to be coming in, especially considering the fact you've had back-to-back losing seasons.
Did Donovan Kaufman lose playing time this spring?
I don't know. I really don't know.
I mean, it seems like he was like always with the twos, which surprised me a little bit.
It was just kind of moving in and out. And I wondered, the beginning of spring ball, Zach Etheridge said he was 1A and 1B. It was Keontae and Donovan at star. And I do wonder that some of that was, hey, star is different in this defense than the nickel has been in the past defenses. So maybe get more reps there, not as much at safety, just kind of plug and play there. It's going to be very interesting to see kind of where he fits in the table because I think he is a guy that has played a good bit of football in the SEC at this point, and it can be very valuable. There's just a lot of depth back there. There's a lot of depth, and then you see that next wave coming in. Going back to the blue chip ratio. How many of those guys were blue chips coming out of high school in that safety and that cornerback room? The future's bright for that group, and it's not surprising. I think much like you mentioned it earlier, running back and defensive back. Those are the 2 position groups you feel really, really rock solid about for Auburn this year. Who are the 2 coaches there? Cadillac Williams, Zach Etheridge, the guys who have been carrying they've been carrying the torch for Auburn over the last few years. And That's why Hugh Freeze, like, it was the easiest it was wide open slam dunks to keep both of those guys on staff. And I think Auburn's going to reap the benefits from it for years to come.
Yeah, I think you're right. Justin Ferguson, how can people check out everything going on at the Auburn Observer and give you some love?
Yeah, auburnobserver.com. Check it out. We've got newsletters coming out on Auburn football and men's basketball, or a podcast pretty much every day of the week. So you can sign up there at $6 a month or $60 a year for a full subscription. We email everything out to you most weekday mornings at 6 a.m. Central Time. And mailbag up today. Had a fun podcast today as well where we talked about some what ifs in Auburn history on the eve of, I guess, when we recorded this podcast, it will be the night of the NBA draft, and we talk about Scoot Henderson. What if he would have come to Auburn? And then that kind of launches into some other what ifs, including some that I hadn't even thought of. So you can check that out.
Awesome. Yeah, be sure to check it out, auburnobserver.com. You can find out my written work at auburndaily.com, and we will see you on Monday. This has been Locked On Auburn.